Last year, I was helping lead an in-person men's retreat. We were sitting in a circle talking about the weight that men carry, the pressure, the responsibility, the work, money, family, kids, leadership at home, all of it. And if you were sitting in that circle with us, I'm sure you'd have something you could add to that conversation. And at some point, the conversation turned to marriage, specifically pursuing your wife. And one by one, several men started sharing how hard that felt for them. Not because they didn't love their wife, but because on top of everything else they were carrying, being a provider, a protector, a father, a leader, this idea of also pursuing their wife felt like too much, like one more thing to get right, one more thing they were failing at, one more demand on an already stretched system. I remember sitting there listening, and honestly, I was a little taken aback because I kept thinking, how did we get here? How did something that once felt so natural, so easy, turn into something that now feels confusing, exhausting, or even burdensome? When we first met our wives, pursuing them was probably the easiest thing we had going on. We made time, we were curious, we were intentional, we showed up without overthinking it. Sure, life was simpler then. We were younger, fewer responsibilities, more energy, more playfulness. We were different men, but still, how does it go from that to this? A few years in, maybe a decade in, and now pursuing your wife feels like something you don't know how to do anymore, or something you're doing wrong, or something that's never quite enough, no matter how hard you try. That's what today's episode is all about, what it actually means to pursue your wife, why so many men struggle with it, why it feels so hard, why it matters more than you think, and most importantly, how to make it simpler and more sustainable without trying harder or turning it into another thing you resent. Because if you think back to the seasons of your relationship where you were actively pursuing her, chances are she felt more loved, more desired, more cared for, and you probably felt more alive too. That's what I want to help you rebuild in your marriage. If you've ever wondered why pursuing your wife feels so much harder than it used to, or why she doesn't feel pursued even though you're trying, stick around. You don't want to miss this one. Welcome to Better Husband, the podcast that helps you answer the question, how can I be a better husband? I'm Angelo Santiago, a men's marriage and relationship coach, and every week I bring you practical insights to help you strengthen your marriage and become the best husband you can be. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know I met my wife about 23 years ago when we were in college. It was my sophomore year, and from the moment we went on our first date, which is its own story that maybe I'll share on a future episode, I knew there was something different about her. I didn't just know it intellectually, I felt it physically, emotionally, even spiritually. Something in me knew this woman mattered. She wasn't just another person I was dating, she was important to me. And once that clicked, everything in me wanted to go after her. I wanted her to feel what I felt about her, that she was the most special person I'd ever met, that I wanted to spend as much time with her as I possibly could, that I saw her, that she was beautiful, that she was cherished, that she was taken care of. I wanted her to know I was all in. And honestly, I didn't hesitate. I didn't overthink it. I didn't feel burdened by it. I would move mountains. I would climb walls. I would do whatever it took to be with her. And the thing that stands out to me now is how natural all that felt. That energy I brought into the relationship, it didn't drain me. It didn't feel like effort. It felt like the most important thing in my life. I didn't wake up thinking, ugh, I have to pursue her again today. It was just what I wanted to do. She loved it, and I loved it too. Fast forward several years into our marriage, though, and things looked very different. Our marriage was struggling. We were disconnected. We were each kind of lost in our own separate worlds. Work, distraction, distance, resentment, unspoken frustration. And by that point, my life already felt heavy. I was working as a firefighter. The stress was real. I was carrying responsibility at work, trying to make sure everything at home was handled, trying to be a provider, trying to make sure we were financially secure. So when the idea of pursuing my wife came up during that season, it didn't feel exciting anymore. It felt exhausting. The last thing I wanted to add to my already full plate was another thing to figure out. What are we going to do this weekend? How do I make her feel cherished? What more do I need to do now? Instead of feeling alive, it felt like pressure. And honestly, when things were hard between us, I didn't want to do it. I wasn't enjoying the relationship, and I was carrying all these questions in my head. Is this even going to make a difference? Does she even want to be with me? If I plan something and she doesn't like it, what then? What if it just leads to another argument? And I had evidence to back that fear up. I could think of times where I did try to do something, plan a day, set something up, try to be intentional, and it didn't go well. It didn't go as planned, or it ended up in tension, or it turned into a fight. So over time, the resistance just grew. Add a kid into the mix, and everything felt even heavier. At that point in my life, pursuing my wife didn't feel like love. It felt like risk. It felt like emotional exposure. It felt like something I was going to get wrong. And so I pulled back because I was tired, guarded, and honestly, afraid. Now, when I look at my life today, what's interesting is that on paper, not that much has gotten easier. We still have a kid. I still work, just not as a firefighter anymore. I'm building a business. I'm creating this podcast. I'm supporting men in their marriages. And my wife, she runs her own extremely successful business. If anything, there's more on our plates now, not less. And yet, the experience of pursuing my wife today is completely different because our marriage is in a good place, because we did the hard, heavy lifting of reconnecting, because we rebuilt trust, because we learned how to communicate, because we stopped avoiding conflict and started dealing with the things as they came up. Pursuing my wife now doesn't feel like a burden. It feels enjoyable. I like doing it. I see how it lights her up. I feel the impact it has on our relationship, and I like how it makes me feel too. What I've come to understand is that pursuing your wife isn't as hard as I once thought it was. It doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to feel like another thing you're failing at. It actually comes down to some much simpler shifts, things I want to talk you through in this episode. But before we get into that, we need to get really clear on one thing first. We need to get on the same page about what pursuing your wife actually means. When men hear the phrase pursue your wife, most of us immediately picture something very specific. Planning dates, doing something romantic, making a gesture, trying to impress her. And for a lot of guys, that image alone is enough to shut the whole idea down because it starts to feel like too much, like performance, like something you're supposed to get right or else. I want to simplify it because when we overcomplicate pursuit, we make it harder than it needs to be. At its core, pursuing your wife means this. It means consistently turning toward her instead of away from her. That's it. Now, that might sound simple, but we have to be clear about what that actually looks like in real life. Turning toward your wife doesn't mean you're always romantic. It doesn't mean you're planning something special every weekend, and it definitely doesn't mean you're constantly on or performing. Turning toward her means choosing connection when it would be easier not to. It means initiating instead of waiting. It means engaging instead of distracting yourself. It means staying present instead of checking out. Sometimes it looks really small. It looks like putting your phone down when she's talking instead of half listening while scrolling. It looks like asking a follow-up question instead of nodding and moving on. It looks like remembering something she shared earlier in the week and checking back in on it. It looks like noticing her mood and responding instead of pretending you don't see it. And just as important, turning toward your wife means noticing how easy it is to turn away. You get busy, you stay distracted, you tell yourself you'll connect later, and over time, that later never happens. Now, I also want to be really clear about something here. This isn't me saying romance doesn't matter. Romance absolutely matters. Playfulness matters. Surprise matters. Shared experiences matter. Depth matters. Adventure matters. And yes, romantic moments matter too. But romance is just one expression of pursuit. It's not the definition of it. If the only time your wife feels pursued is on date night, then pursuit is going to feel rare and fragile. But when pursuit is woven into everyday moments, how you show up, how you listen, how you engage, it becomes something sustainable. And that leads to the next question most men have. If pursuit really is that simple, why does it feel so hard? Because if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, I get what pursuing my wife means now, but it still feels hard, you're not wrong. This is the part I want to normalize because a lot of men beat themselves up right here. They assume that if something feels hard, it must mean they're doing it wrong or that they're not cut out for this kind of a relationship. That's not what's happening. Pursuing your wife feels hard for a few very real reasons, and most of them have nothing to do with laziness or lack of care. First, most men are tired. Not just physically tired, but mentally and emotionally tired. You're carrying responsibility all day. You're making decisions. You're solving problems. You're holding things together. By the time you get home, the part of you that knows how to initiate connection is often the most depleted part of you. So when the thought of pursuing your wife comes up, it doesn't feel like something life-giving. It feels like one more thing. Second, for a lot of men, pursuing your wife feels emotionally risky. Early on, when the relationship was new, that risk felt worth it. There was excitement, there was momentum, there was a sense that your effort would pay off. But when a marriage has gone through distance, conflict, or repeated disappointment, that changes. You remember the times you tried to connect and it didn't go well, the times you planned something and it turned into tension, the times you reached out and felt rejected, criticized, or misunderstood. So your system starts protecting you. You tell yourself it's easier not to try, safer to stay neutral, less painful to keep some distance. Another reason this feels hard is that many men don't actually know how to pursue outside of fixing or performing. If your main way of showing care is through providing, solving, or taking care of logistics, then emotional pursuit can feel vague and uncomfortable. There's no checklist, there's no clear win, no obvious result you can point to and say, see, I did it. And when something doesn't come off with a clear payoff, the motivation drops. There's also the fear of getting it wrong. A lot of men carry this anxiety that if they initiate something, connection, time together, or a conversation, it might not go well. Or worse, it might open the door to conflict. So instead of risking that, they wait. They wait for the right time or for things to calm down. They wait until they feel more confident, and that waiting slowly turns into distance. Now add kids into the mix and everything intensifies. Your time shrinks, your energy gets split, the relationship moves from being the center of your life to one part of a much bigger system, and without meaning to, the marriage becomes something you manage instead of something you actively tend. All of this makes pursuing your wife feel hard. So if that's been your experience, I want you to hear this clearly. The difficulty you feel isn't a sign that you don't love your wife. It's a sign that you're human, you're tired, and you're trying to protect yourself in a relationship that truly matters to you. But here's the part you also need to hear, and this is important. Just because pursuing your wife feels hard doesn't mean it actually has to stay that way. In fact, a lot of what makes it feel hard has more to do with how you're thinking about pursuit than pursuit itself. And before we talk about how to make it easier and more sustainable, there's one more piece I want to anchor in: why this matters more than you probably think. When pursuing your wife fades, the impact usually isn't obvious. It doesn't show up as a clear breaking point. Most of the time, it shows up under the surface. She stops reaching for you as much. She stops sharing as freely. She stops expecting you to be available because she's learned over time not to rely on that connection being there. This is why wives often talk about feeling unseen or unimportant long before they talk about leaving. They don't usually wake up one day and decide the marriage is over. They get tired first, tired of initiating, tired of carrying the emotional side of the relationship, tired of wondering if they still matter the way they used to. And here's the part that I also want you to hear. Pursuit isn't just about her. When you stop pursuing your wife, you don't just lose connection with her, you lose access to parts of yourself. You lose the part of yourself that's playful, the part of you that's curious, the part of you that feels alive and engaged. But when pursuit comes back into the marriage, something happens on both sides. She feels more secure, more desired, more connected, and you feel more engaged, more purposeful, more present. This is why pursuit matters, because it keeps the relationship alive. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, I can see why this matters, but it still sounds like a lot, that's exactly where we're going next. Because the biggest mistake men make at this point is assuming the answer is to try harder, and that's not what actually works. Real quick, before we get back to the show, if you're like me and you're a busy husband with a lot on your plate, sometimes you hear something on this podcast, an idea, a specific practice, or a suggestion, and you have every intention of doing the thing that you just heard. But life gets busy, and sometimes you forget. Well, that's why I created the Better Husband Toolkit. This is a short, concise, downloadable cheat sheet with 3 of the most important relational skills I believe every husband should know and have in their tool belt in order to improve their marriage. If you're asking yourself, how can I be a better husband today? Go to betterhusbandtoolkit.com and download the short document. Again, go to betterhusbandtoolkit.com or click the link in the show notes and get your toolkit today. Now, back to the show. This is usually the point where a lot of men think they've found the answer. They heard all this and say, okay, I get it. I need to do more. I need to try harder. More dates, more effort, more intentionality, more doing. And on the surface, that makes sense. Effort matters. Caring matters. Showing up matters. But here's the problem. Trying harder is usually what men reach for when something already feels heavy. And when you add more effort on top of exhaustion, resentment isn't far behind. When pursuit turns into effort driven by pressure, it stops feeling like love and it starts feeling like obligation. And your wife can feel that. She might not say it this way, but what often lands for her isn't he's pursuing me, it's he's trying to not get in trouble, or he's doing this because he thinks he's supposed to. What actually works is not trying harder, it's making pursuit easier. And by easier, I don't mean lazy or passive, I mean sustainable. Sustainable pursuit doesn't ask you to become a different man. It asks you to stop waiting for the perfect moment and start choosing small moments of connection you can actually maintain. It looks like consistency instead of intensity. It looks like short check-ins instead of grand plans. It looks like noticing instead of fixing. It looks like responding instead of retreating. It's not about doing more. It's about removing the distance that's already there. One of the biggest shifts for me was realizing that pursuit didn't need to feel like an event. It could just be part of how I showed up. A comment, a question, a moment of presence, a follow-up later in the day. Those things don't drain you. They actually give you something back because connection tends to do that when it's real. And here's something else. Pursuit gets easier when you stop tying it to a specific outcome. When the goal is she has to respond a certain way, or this needs to go well, or this should fix things, you're setting yourself up to pull back the moment it doesn't go perfectly. But when the goal is simply, I'm going to turn toward her today, the pressure drops. You're not chasing reassurance. You're not trying to earn points. You're just staying connected. And over time, that's what rebuilds trust. Once pursuit becomes simpler, once it's about presence instead of performance, it usually starts to feel good again. You see the impact. You feel more engaged. The relationship starts to feel less like another responsibility and more like a place you want to be. And that's the shift. Not trying harder, not forcing yourself, but choosing a way of pursuing your wife that you can actually sustain. And that brings us to what to do with this right now. As always, the work of becoming a better husband comes down to 3 things: awareness, action, and accountability. So let's walk through each one. We'll start with awareness. Your awareness step for today is one simple reflection question. Where in my relationship have I been turning away instead of turning toward my wife, and why? This isn't about looking for big dramatic moments, and it's definitely not about beating yourself up. It's just about being honest, noticing the small moments where you default to distraction, the times where you stay quiet instead of engaging, the places where distance has slowly become normal. You don't need to fix any of this yet, just see it clearly. That's awareness. Now, once you've answered that question, you can move into action. Your action step for this week is intentionally simple, not because the work is small, but because consistency matters more than intensity. Each day this week, choose one moment to intentionally turn toward your wife. That might be asking a question, checking in, following up on something she shared earlier, or simply being fully present when she's talking. Keep it small. And as you do this, notice what it feels like in your body, not how she responds, not whether it works. Just notice what it feels like when you stay engaged instead of pulling back. That's it. Just practice staying connected. And finally, accountability. Awareness without action doesn't change anything, and action without accountability is hard to sustain, especially when life gets busy or resistance shows up. If you're realizing you want support staying consistent with this work, that's exactly what we do inside Better Husband Academy. You don't have to do this alone, and you don't have to figure it out by yourself, and you don't have to wait until things get worse to get support. If that feels like the next right step for you, you can learn more at betterhusbandacademy.com or click the link in the show notes. Here's what I want you to leave with today. Pursuing your wife isn't about doing more. It's about staying connected. When you stop trying to perform and start choosing presence, pursuit becomes something that gives back to her, to your marriage, and to you. Thanks for being here. You're listening to Better Husband. I'm Angelo Santiago, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, I have a quick request. If you've ever gotten any value from the show and you want the show to continue to grow, to access bigger and more knowledgeable guests, and to keep providing you with more ways that you can be a better husband in your marriage, simply leave a rating and a review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a few seconds, and those reviews go a long way in attracting more experts and bigger guests to the show. So if you're feeling up to it, as a favor to me, I'd love to see a rating and a review from you. Thank you so much for being a listener and all your support.